All right, guys. Well, here we are doing youth group messages online. So I know this isn't really ideal. I miss you guys. I miss having the face to face interaction with you guys. And I'm sure that you guys miss hanging out with me and hearing some of my jokes and being around with me. So I know this isn't ideal, but this is what we have to do for the time being. And I hope that this is encouraging to you guys. I hope that you guys can still stick with me as we go through Ecclesiastes. I hope that you guys are following along in your own Bibles. I hope you guys are digging into the Word of God every day as well. So, if you're not a teenager and you're looking at this, you're not a teenager in our, maybe you're not a teenager in our youth group, or maybe you're an adult who's on our Hauser Community Church YouTube channel and saw this, welcome. This might be a little weird for you because you've missed a lot of what we've been talking about as a youth group through the entire book of Ecclesiastes. We're actually on chapter 8, so you've missed the first 7 chapters of the book. And if that seems like you're like, okay, that sounds fun, let's talk about Ecclesiastes with Rob, that's great. And if not, if you're like, oh, I don't really want to listen to that, that's fine. Don't worry, I'm not offended. But if you do stick around, I hope you do pick something up, and I hope you do learn from this. Now, Mr. Rogers aside, let me get a couple of youth group related announcements out of the way. First off, our Sunday school lesson is going to be available online. It's going to be in the form of some reading and some questions that you can answer on your own. You can go and just work through it through the PDF or print it off and write all over it and answer the questions and do what you need to do for that. And that will be available on our website. So if you go to hauserchurch.org, if I can speak, and you go to our ministries tab, on there will be a youth ministry videos portion and then a Sunday school curriculum portion for a youth group. Go there, you'll have to log in. The login is a login that I have, so you'll have to get in contact with me, and that's because Gospel Project and Lifeway are the people that we use this material through, so you can't just use it. We can't just distribute it for free. We've bought licenses and stuff, so we have to comply with their rules. So if that sounds interesting to you, if you want to do that, please get in contact with me. I have the stuff for that, the login information, and I can put the contact information for me in the description of this video, and I'm going to do that. So you can get a hold of me at any time you want to talk, get the login information for the Sunday school curriculum, as well as if you guys just want to hang out and talk to me, you want to call me, you want to text me, you want to get a hold of me, please don't hesitate. I want to be here for you guys, and while this is a weird time, I still want to continue to do ministry with you guys. So I am not available for face-to-face meetings during this time because we want to be respectful and compliant to the wishes of our government, but I am trying to set up a Zoom conference call, which is a big group video talk thing. So I'm going to try and set that up. I'll have more information for you guys soon. So if you have internet, be on the lookout for that. We'll do that, and that way we can hang out and talk and see each other and just have a good interaction again, like what we do at youth group. So be on the look for that. I'm aiming for this Friday, but I will let you know. Now, let's turn our attention to Ecclesiastes. So we've been studying the book of Ecclesiastes. We've been looking through the whole book, seeing what Solomon, who we presume is the teacher, the author of this book, has to say when it comes to wisdom. And we've been digging through the first half of this book. We're in chapter 8 now. And in chapter 8, we are going to be looking at the next portion. So we're in the second half of the book. The second half of the book, Solomon is offering more practical wisdom, more wisdom for what do you do with this information? How do you navigate the world, and where do we land when it comes to certain topics and things? And one of the things that we saw during the first half of the book was all the negative and pessimistic outlooks, the search for satisfaction, and how those never really work out. And in the second half of the book, we see how he starts to clear away the hevel, the vapor, the smoke, the things that cause confusion, or we don't quite see things with a clear picture. And we begin to see what is practical wisdom, what is good advice. and how do we apply that? And this week, chapter 8 deals with authority, the authority of local people, the authority of, as in a king or a ruler or maybe a president. But then it deals with a bigger picture of who is in charge. And in chapter 7, we spent time looking at the authority of the sovereignty of God. But he continues that message on in chapter 8, and we're going to see how that plays out when it comes to practical authority and how we submit to that. So, allow me to pray, and then we're going to read through Ecclesiastes 8. So, Lord, thank you for today. Thank you for how you continue to keep us safe, how you continue to watch over us. And Lord, I ask that you would protect us, that you would allow us to be your witnesses during this time. And also I pray that you would open your word to our eyes, allow us to see, to hear, to understand, and to take what we read and apply it to our lives. In your name, amen. Excuse me. When we look at Ecclesiastes 8, we're going to be reading from the ESV version. So if you have a Bible, please, I encourage you, follow along. Ecclesiastes chapter 8, starting in verse 1. Who is like the wise, and who knows the interpretation of a thing? A man's wisdom makes his face shine, and the hardness of his face is changed. I say, keep the king's command, because of God's oath to him. But be not hasty to go from his presence. Do not take your stand in an evil cause, for he does whatever he pleases. For the word of the king is supreme. And who may say to him, what are you doing? Whoever keeps the command will know no evil thing, and the wise heart will know the proper time and the just way. For there is a time and a way for everything, although man's trouble lies heavy on him. For he does not know what it is to be, for who can tell how it will be? No man has power to retain the spirit or power over the day of death. There is no discharge from war, nor will wickedness deliver those who are given to it. All this I observed, while applying my heart to all that is done under the sun, when man had power over man to his hurt. Then I saw the wicked buried. They used to go in and out of the holy place, and were praised in the city where they had done such things. This also is vanity, or hevel. Because the sentence against an evil deed is not executed speedily. The heart of the children of man is fully set to do evil. Though a sinner does evil 100 times and prolongs his life, yet I know that it will be well with those who fear God, because they fear before him. But it will not be well with the wicked, neither will he prolong his days like a shadow, because he does not fear before God. There is a vanity that takes place on earth, that there are righteous people to whom it happens according to the deeds of the wicked, and there are wicked people to whom it happens according to the deeds of the righteous. I said that this also is vanity, or hevel. And I commend joy, for man has nothing better under the sun but to eat and drink and be joyful, for this will go with him in his toil through the days of his life that God has given him under the sun. When I applied my heart to know wisdom and to see the business that is done on earth, how neither day nor night do one's eyes see sleep, then I saw the work of God, that man cannot find out the work that is done under the sun. However much man may toil in seeking, he will not find it out. Even though a wise man claims to know, he cannot find it out. This is the word of the Lord. So when we look at this passage, we see this incredible picture of who is authority. And it starts with this opening rhetorical question from Solomon, from the teacher. He says, who is like the wise, and who knows the interpretation of a thing? It's an interesting question. And he carries that answer throughout this passage. Who really is wise? Who really does know the interpretation of things? And we'll see how this connects with the thoughts from the passage before, where we're comparing wisdom and folly, as well as the sovereignty of God. Remember that. God is in control, the sovereignty of God. And how this connects to who ultimately is in authority, who ultimately is wise, and ultimately who is in control. And so we see this picture of a human authority. In this passage, it's a king. And this would be very typical of this era, this time period where the Israelites were under King Solomon, where people like Daniel would have known the king of Babylon, where people all throughout this time period would know who a king is. A king is someone who is the ultimate authority in that land. You listen to the king, you obey the king. And this is where we sometimes struggle. Because the first command he gives is keep the king's command because of God's oath to him. And sometimes that's translated as not just because of God's oath to him, but because of your oath to God. See, it's not necessarily as powerful to say the king's oath, or the oath that God has with a king. It's like, okay, cool, God, you have this promise with this king, but it is more authoritative when we say, I have an oath to God because I am a Christian, I'm a believer, which means that God has placed authority in my life that I have to submit to, that I have to obey. And it says, Romans 13:1 says, let every person be subject to the governing authorities. For there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have instituted by God. Basically, we are subject to authorities because God has placed them there, and God has given us a command to submit to them, to obey them, to follow their rule. I mean, this is our civil duty. And oftentimes Christians really struggle with this because we live in a country where it's kind of your political right to disagree with those in authority. It's kind of your freedom, right, to not agree with the powers or the authorities that are placed above you, whether that's a teacher or a parent or a cop or a king, the president. We love to challenge authority. And that's not what this passage is saying. It's saying that we need to obey the authority that's placed over our lives. But then he goes on to the section about what if a ruler abuses their power? What if they're forcing you to do something that is evil? What if they're pushing to do what is wrong? And that's where he says, don't be hasty to do that. Don't be hasty. Don't take a stand in an evil cause. Because we are called by God to uphold truth and righteousness, to be seeking after the things of him, what is good, what is joyful in God's eyes. And to do evil things because a king or authority told us to is wrong. But this would be a point also where it would be like, okay, that means we need to challenge the authorities. No. He gives us an option for discretion, for discernment, to look at what the authority is saying to us and be like, okay, is this biblical? Is this right? And if it's not, I don't have the power to ignore it or be rebellious. I have the obligation to tell the ruler what is right. It says, whoever keeps a command will know no evil thing, and the wise heart will know the proper time and the just way. We have to be willing to, and right before that it says, for the word of the king is supreme, and who may say to him, what are you doing? Essentially, we can't just go up to him and be like, what are you doing? But we do have a calling to correct, to point to the truth. Whether it's a king or an authority, if they are doing something that is wrong, it is our duty to be like, hey, that's not right. We need to do what is right. And it says, don't be afraid, essentially. For the king, no one knows what will happen. No one knows what will be or what's not to be. No one knows when you'll die or you'll be taken from a position of honor or power or authority or discharged from war is what it says. Essentially, we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. And so we shouldn't let that stop us from being willing to call out what is wrong. That shouldn't stop us from calling out what is wrong. Our discernment should take place, and our willingness to uphold the truth should take place over our desire to rebel against authority. In Romans 13, verse 2, he goes on to say, therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. Essentially, we need to be careful. We need to submit to authority. We need to listen to authority, but we also need to have discernment to know when to call out authority and to point them to the truth. It's a gentle correction, not a angry mob or riot telling them how we hate what they've decided to do. We need to be willing to point to the truth, to treat each other with love and submit to authority. And this is where we see the passage transition a little bit. So he talks about a human authority, and then he talks about what about justice? One of the things that a good ruler does is they perform great justice. They have a sense of what is right and what is wrong. And so it's easier to follow after them because they're not choosing to do what is wrong as often as they would choose to do something right. I mean, people are human. Rulers are human, and so they will always have sinful things in their lives. There will be times where they choose to do something that is wrong, but they are not subject to that if they do have that discernment. If they have that discernment, if they're a good judge, a good ruler, they know what is right and wrong. And so they're more likely to choose what is right and what is wrong, and to punish what is wrong and to reward what is right. But sometimes justice is twisted. And he gives us this example, the teacher does. He shows us this wicked person who is buried in this place of high honor because and they lived a long life. They did well for themselves, despite the fact that they were doing something that was wrong. And we go, wait, that's not right. This wicked person got away with what they did. Their sins were rewarded. And not only were they rewarded, they were given a position of honor when they died. People loved them. They had fame when they died. People came for miles and miles to their funeral. That's not justice. What kind of ruler allows that kind of injustice to suffice? While it goes on to say that the righteous people, essentially, don't prolong their lives. They die young, or they don't have that same fame or honor. We should, if we have a good ruler, someone who is in a good sense of authority, not abusing their power, they're going to reward those that are doing right. And that makes sense. But to have someone who is rewarding those who are wicked, or the society that is rewarding those who are wicked, seems so backwards. But Solomon gives us a higher picture here. He says, "Yet I know it will be well for those who fear God, because they fear before him." Think about that. What is the greatest authority in our lives? God. Who is the one who we answer to? God. Who is the one who in all of this is the reason we follow these authorities, that we point them to the truth? God. And ultimately, we should be fearing him over all else, because we know that God has ultimate justice. Just because we don't see it in this world doesn't mean that justice won't happen, because justice is a bigger picture than what we could ever imagine. Justice doesn't have to be an immediate result. It could be prolonged or patiently waiting for the end. And he points to that it will not be well with the wicked because they don't fear God. Just because they succeed or are successful or things seem to be going well for them in this life doesn't mean that the next life will be. Hell is a real place that people really will be cast into and really will suffer for eternity. The effects of sin, the effects of wickedness, it will not be unpunished. Sin must be punished. It must have justice, which is why Christ died on the cross for us, why Jesus came and took our punishment. Not when we were better, not when we were good, not because we're righteous on our own. No, it says while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And in that sense, we are saved because of him, and we are able to say that I will spend eternity with God because of him. He's in control. He had a plan, and his plan is being enacted throughout this world. Knowing that Christ died for us, that his death gives us a new status as righteous, means that we will spend eternity with him, and that there are people who won't. And that should be frightful to us. Because here's the thing. Like I said just a moment ago, when we were talking about rulers that are doing something wrong, we shouldn't just stick it to the man in revolt. We should also be aware that if there are people who are wicked, who are sinners, who are not going to spend eternity with God, that should spark our desire to show them Christ, to present the gospel to them, because we want them to be with Christ. We should never wish upon someone else an eternity in hell. Because what kind of hate crime is that? To look at someone you know as a human and weigh their actions in your own heart, making yourself the position of a judge, to say, I know better than God, and I presume that you should suffer for what you have done. How cruel and arrogant and stupid of us. That's why he spends so much time talking about foolish people who try and do stuff like that. We should not be like the fool. We should be like Christ, who loved sinners, all of us. How do we show the gospel to people who are wicked? How do we show the gospel to people who are abusing their power and authority? That is the question that we need to be asking ourselves in this context. How do we allow ourselves to be used by God? When we know the truth, we know where we're going. How do we allow ourselves to be used by God for his purpose, to reach those that are seemingly lost, those that seem to be far beyond the grasp of the gospel? Those are the people that God wants us to be taking the gospel to. How can we do that today? And we enter this final portion of the passage, and he says that, the righteous people, they're taken away from earth. There's this hevel there, and the deeds of the wicked, it doesn't make sense. What happens to the wicked should be happening to the righteous, and what happens to the righteous should be happening to the wicked. We already talked about this a little bit, but then he answers the question. He says it's hevel, it's vanity, it's this cloud of vapor that we can't see through. We don't understand it. And I think that's the key. We don't understand what God is doing, but God does. He goes on and says this last little piece here in verse 15. It says, life that God has given him under the sun. Our lives are given to us by God. Our very breath comes from God, which means I don't have to understand what's going on. I don't need to know what this world is about. And that's what Solomon goes on to say. When I applied my heart to know wisdom and see the business that is done on earth, how neither day nor night do one's eyes see sleep, then I saw all the work of God, that man cannot find out the work that is done under the sun. However much man may toil in seeking, he will not find it out. Even though a wise man claims to know, he cannot find it out. We will not understand. Solomon was one of the wisest people in the world. He asked God for wisdom, and he could not understand what God was doing in this world. And I think that's key. We will not understand what God is always doing. We will not understand why the wicked go unpunished in this world, and we may not understand why the righteous seemingly get punished, or what we assume is punishment. We do not know God's ways because he is sovereign. He is completely 100% in control. He knows what he's doing. He is all-powerful and all-knowing. I mean, he knows everything that is happening, will happen, and has happened. He knows it all. He has authority over it all. The power to control, to change, to build, to create. I mean, everything is subject to him, which means our worlds of this doesn't seem right may not be the bigger picture of what's actually going on. We may not understand what is happening. In fact, I would say we don't understand. But we can know that God does know what is going on. And understanding that he is control of this world and that he has the power and he's not abusing that. We know that God is good and loving, which means he won't abuse his power, that he is not slacking on justice, though, that justice will be served, just not maybe how we picture it, but in a more final version. That he does care for us and for the wicked people that we assume are far beyond reach. That he wants us to reach out to them. He wants us to love them. He wants us to submit to his authority when he said, go and make disciples of every nation. I didn't put a little asterisk on that and say, if they're this type of person or if they've, this bad person, then obviously you can't reach them. No, he said, go and be my witnesses to every nation. Disciple every nation. Disciple all people. There's no limit on that. Spread the gospel. That's how we submit to authority of God. We are subject to him, and he knows this world, he knows people, and he knows what comes next. And we should be comforted by that. And that's why the teacher says, and I commend joy. I strongly encourage joy, which seems so backwards in a world that we don't understand, in a world that things don't make sense. A lot of us are under quarantine right now, and it doesn't make sense why God would do this. What is God's plan in all of this? But he says this, he commends joy, because our life comes from God. There's nothing better under the sun but to eat and drink and be joyful, for this will go with him in his toil through the days of his life that God has given him under the sun. As long as we are on this earth, God gives us our breath every day. He gives us joys every day. He gives us blessings. He provides for our needs. He provides things that we don't even imagine or think of. Just the very fact that we all have roofs over our head, or the fact that we can do online things during a time such as this, is so incredible that we have to recognize that there is joys that we can take during this time. God has a plan, and it's a good plan. We can trust him, knowing that he has a plan for this world and all of this stuff that's happening on, all this hevel, this confusion, smog that we don't see through, he sees clearly. And we can trust that he is not abusing his power, that he is a good authority. And we can take joy in the things we have in this world, in this life, knowing that God has a plan, allowing ourselves to share that with other people, share the gospel with others around us, but also to take joy in what we have, to enjoy the little things, to enjoy the things that God has provided for us, knowing that I don't have to worry. I don't have to be in control of this world. I don't have to be in control of this life. God has it under control. Trust him and submit to him and his authority. I'm going to have some small group questions in the comments or in the description of this video that you can look at and be like, hey, let me just answer these on my own. If you want to text them to me or shoot me a Facebook or an Instagram message on those, that would be great. But, or even in the comments on this video. But how are we trusting God's authority? And how are we submitting to his authority? Are we treating it with joy and spreading the gospel, doing as we're commanded to do? Or are we rebelling against what God has asked us to do? Let's pray. Lord, thank you for today. Thank you for the chance we have to speak your word, to talk about your authority and how you are in control. Thank you for the plans that you have for us, the plans that we may not understand, but the plans that you know are good, the plans that you know and have control over. Thank you that you are in control and you are a good and loving God. Thank you. And in your name, amen.